Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Yunko Etade. Coming up, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa condemns Donald Trump's decision to impose a 30% tariff on goods from his country. Trump claiming that trade relationship is unfair and imbalanced. Ramaphosa hitting back, calling the move a misinterpretation of trade data. The United Nations says it's deeply troubled by the deaths of at least 10 people at anti-government protests in Kenya. Deadly demonstrations rocking the country on Monday, with widespread looting and the destruction of property adding to the chaos. And over a century after it was taken by French colonial forces, France's parliament votes to return a historic talking drum back to Ivory Coast. This move honouring President Macron's promise to give back stolen African works of art, but thousands of pieces are still being held in museums across the country. We're going to begin the programme with rising tensions between the US and South Africa. President Cyril Ramaphosa has slammed Donald Trump's decision to impose a new 30% tariff on South African goods. Trump announced on Monday that the move targets 14 nations, including South Africa, claiming trade ties have been unfair and imbalanced. Ramaphosa has hit back, calling it a misinterpretation of the data. The announcement came after Trump threatened an extra 10% levy on countries working with BRICS nations. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and of course, South Africa. The tariffs could deal a serious blow to South Africa's economy. The US remains its largest trading partner. Well, let's cross over to Johannesburg now and speak to Lumkil Modi, who is a lecturer in economics at the University of Witwatersrand. Lumkil, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. I want to first of all start off with what the US is saying. It's saying that the trade relationship with South Africa is unbalanced. Ramaphosa insists that more than half of US goods aren't taxed and that the ones that are taxed do face only a minimal levy. Just walk us through the scope of the trade relationships between the US and South Africa.
Thank you so much. Good evening to you and to the viewers. The US has been historically a very good trade partner with South Africa, including South Africa being accommodated in the African Growth Opportunities Act. That's allowing about 66% of South African goods to land in the US at zero duty, and the remainder being charged a tariff depending on the quality of the product and the type of the product. At the same time, the landed goods from America, about 77% of them, come here into South Africa and land at zero duty, and therefore only about the remaining percentage that lands here with some duty. Again, similar rules applied. So our argument as South Africa is that we think the approach of the US to South Africa's trade relation really is being unfair and is misunderstanding the methodology of understanding the trade deficit that America has with us. And more importantly, we are ready to engage with the US to try and resolve the different methodological approach, because the US, like any other market, is very important to South Africa when we're trying to redevelop our country 30 years into our democracy, given centuries of exclusion of the majority of South Africans.
So you would agree then with Ramaphosa's response that what Trump
Absolutely.
is saying is a misinterpretation of the data? Well, it just comes after nearly 2 months since that visit from Ramaphosa to Trump at the White House. Many hailed that as a diplomatic win for Ramaphosa. Yet now we're seeing that they must have not come to a clear understanding, because we have this tariff now of 30%. Tell us about whether it's gone wrong for South Africa. Where has it gone wrong since that meeting between the two leaders?
I mean, for us, it's really emphasized this regime, the Trump regime, in terms of how it's dealing with the geoeconomics. That is their way or no way. Therefore, we appreciate that we're dealing with a government that's going to be very, very difficult to work with, and you have to navigate the complexities. So I think in South Africa, our president, through his leadership, appreciate the complexities that we may not be able to convince, given that this president has got his own truth, what you call an alternative truth. Therefore, dealing with them is to sit at the table. We may not get what you want, but we need to endure these years, these Trump years, and hope that the American people will realize the damage that's being done in the post-war global compromise, and in doing so, vote correctly and ensure that not only South Africa's relations, but many countries' relations, because we're not the only one that explained this, that the world will come together and use the existing institutions such as the World Trade Organization to try and deal with differences around trade and make sure that there's fair trade that's looking at expanding opportunities, particularly for those countries that colonized, such as South Africa and many others, in ensuring that we build a world order that's democratic, that is transparent, that is accountable to humanity, so that all humanity move forward as one, because we're all one people at the end of the day.
Well, Lukmi, I did want to get your opinion on another levy that Trump is threatening to impose now on BRICS countries. Of course, South Africa is part of that. He threatened to impose a 10% levy on South Africa and the other fellow BRICS countries. What do you think is driving him to do that?
I think he is threatened by an alternative arrangement, which is taking on the establishment. I think one of the reasons that we joined BRICS and we formed BRICS, in fact, with other countries, was to take on the existing world order, where the dominant economies, including France, Britain, Germany, Canada, US, Australia, dominate all institutions, whether it's the IMF, is the World Bank, is the World Trade Organization, including, in fact, the local representation in the UN, where we've been calling for developing countries to have a seat in the Security Council and have a voice to make sure that we participate in resolving conflict. Those issues, basically, that were put on the table, I think, don't sit very, very well with Trump, who wants to dictate a different agenda for the US and for the world. And we're calling upon even our allies as France to say, look, let's go back to the post-war agreement and work with these institutions, particularly in dealing with trade, but also in dealing with conflict that you see in the world, whereby we've used the international courts to try and resolve wars, and other countries instead are not using those machinery. So it is those stands that South Africa, I think, in the world, we're standing on human rights, we're standing on humanity, on equality and democracy, where many countries are sitting back and we're becoming victims of being attacked by countries, because many have lost the values of the post-war agreement, which are driven by human rights, by equality and fraternity, and now are choosing to go to war than sit down and negotiate. It is that price that we're paying as South Africa, but also as part of BRICS.
Lumkil, great to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on Eye on Africa today.
Good evening. Thank you so much.
We'll turn to Kenya now, where it's the day after 11 people were killed in deadly anti-government protests. The United Nations saying today that it's deeply troubled by the violence, condemning not only the tragic loss of life, but also widespread looting and the destruction of property during the demonstration. Hospitals were not spared. At least 2 were damaged yesterday. Protesters had been commemorating the July 7th demonstrations known as Saba Saba. They were the first major protests in Kenya that took place 35 years ago. Emily Boyle reports now.
Life has almost returned to normal in Nairobi this Tuesday, a day after violent clashes between protesters and police officers. Shops opened as usual and locals are back to work after an obligatory day off.
I didn't work yesterday, so I didn't earn any money at all. I hope in any case that the government, whether they like it or not, has heard the people's demands.
Authorities closed the capital's main roads on Monday to dissuade protesters from reaching the centre of town. Every year, thousands celebrate Saba Saba Day, remembering the nationwide protests on the 7th of July 1990, when Kenyans had filled the streets demanding free elections. Since last year, the commemoration has been linked to a wave of protest against President William Ruto, accused of corruption and police brutality. Not without reason, on the 25th of June this year, several protesters were killed in clashes with the police.
Last time the police came with violence. They should come in peace. Looking at these trucks, it's clear they want violence.
The situation was extremely tense yesterday and the protests rapidly descended into violence. As protesters threw stones at the police, authorities responded with firing tear gas grenades. Violence on both sides, which was condemned by the United Nations.
We are deeply troubled by the killings yesterday of at least 10 people, as well as looting and destruction of property in Kenya as police and other security forces responded to violent protests in the capital of Nairobi. Lethal ammunition, rubber bullets, tear gas, and water cannons were used.
Hundreds of protesters were also arrested. The divorce between President Ruto and Kenyan youth has rarely been more apparent.
Next, it could be a medical breakthrough in the fight against malaria. The first drug to treat the disease, specifically in babies and very young children, has been given the green light by Switzerland. That approval could pave the way for 8 African countries, including Nigeria and Malawi, who participated in its assessment to issue quick approvals and roll it out soon after. Known as Coartem baby or Riamet baby in some nations, the medication is specifically formulated to dissolve easily in breast milk, making it ideal for infants. Malaria remains a huge threat, with around 30 million babies born each year in high-risk areas across Africa. France's parliament has voted to return a historic drum to Ivory Coast that was seized by French colonial forces over a century ago. The move echoes President Emmanuel Macron's 2018 pledge to return stolen artworks to Africa and build a new relationship with the continent. But progress has been slow. France still holds tens of thousands of objects from sub-Saharan Africa in public museums. Charlotte Hughes has the story.
It was seized by France more than a century ago. Known as a talking drum, this instrument is now set to return to Ivory Coast, its original home, after the French Parliament voted to return it.
It is a clear acknowledgement of a history of colonial violence, looting and cultural erasure.
More than 3 meters long and weighing in at 430 kilograms, the instrument was used to transmit messages, including warnings.
The drum made it possible to transmit messages over long distances, up to 30 kilometers in all directions, to villages neighboring the village of Adjamé, where it was located.
Taken by colonial troops in 1916, the drum was sent to France in 1929. It has since been exhibited at 2 museums in Paris.
You can see that it has been quite badly affected by insects, which have dug holes. This has weakened the drum.
Repaired in 2022, the drum has been eagerly anticipated back in Ivory Coast. The country had officially requested for it to be returned more than 6 years ago. Back in 2017, President Emmanuel Macron announced he wished to establish a new relationship with Africa and pledged to return looted artworks to the continent. But repatriations have been slow. France still holds tens of thousands of objects from sub-Saharan Africa in public museums.
Well, that's it from all of us on the Eye on Africa team. Thanks so much for your company and stay tuned. There's plenty more news coming up.
"30 years after the Bosnian War, is reconciliation possible?"
I think that the Bosnian idea is to have a country of all citizens, as not divided by the ethnic.
Serbs and Bosniaks are learning to live side by side, even if total reconciliation remains out of reach.
There's not a day goes by when I don't think about Srebrenica, about what happened. My dad was shot by Serbian forces.
The Dayton Accords brought peace, but nationalist rhetoric is fueling resentment. Watch Bosnia and Herzegovina Revisited on France 24.